people were failing, background screening checks because they've got a criminal record, a completely fake university degree, which you can make in literally 2 minutes.
I've been target of fraud, and it happens quite regularly. And they sent me a fully legitimate bank account in Slovakia, which was very scary.
We're seeing candidates sort of almost like actively trying to commit fraud by obtaining a position.
You give them the keys to the castle, essentially.
They only need to send 100 of them out and get one.
If I played it back to you now, Doug, you would think it was Andy.
You'll never get away from the fact of the quality of the check has got to be.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of What the FTE podcast. My name is Donal Greene. I'm your host for this week, standing in for our CEO, Andrew McLeod. Andy's taken a well-deserved week off, and I'm delighted to be joined here by our esteemed sales director from EMEA, Doug Beavis. Doug, welcome to the podcast, and I believe this is your first ever podcast. How are you feeling about that?
I'm a bit nervous, but I'm sure I'll be fine.
It's going to be absolutely fine.
Yeah.
You've been in the background screening industry more than almost anyone I know. So 25 years in the UK background screening industry. Last couple of years, you've been sales director EMEA at Certn. Maybe could you give us a bit of background as to how you ended up at Certn, what your beginnings in the industry were, and maybe talk about what you've seen over the sort of 2.5 decades of being in the industry in the UK.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I got into the industry many years ago. A friend of mine started a background screening company called backgroundchecking.com above a hairdresser's in
that's a valuable domain today, I'd say.
Above a hairdresser's in a little town called Marlow. And our operations centre was in the MD's house on the Isle of Wight. But that's when it all started, and I was the sales director there. And back in those days, I was phoning companies up saying, we're a background screening company. They didn't know what the hell I was talking about. And the whole concept of doing references on behalf of HR department, or the HR departments, was completely alien to people back then. They didn't really get it, but and then we started getting a lot of traction, and it really started. I think the FCA in the UK, with the FCA regulations and things like that, really sort of kicked off the industry. Fraud and employee fraud and things like that. But and it's I've seen it sort of develop from no online platforms. We had background screening forms couriered to the hairdressers daily. We had fax machine constantly on, faxing background screening forms in. So yeah, I've seen it go full circle from there to where we are now with, checks that we can do in seconds. We can do ID in literally, how long? Half a second, probably now, right to where we are now. So I've seen the industry grow from literally nothing to where it is today. So yeah, it's I've seen a lot of things.
So you were sales and operations director at Greene, which is I guess a mid-market player in the UK, a very strong player in that segment, working also with some enterprise clients in the Middle East. And we at Certn, we acquired that company just over maybe 3 years ago.
Yeah.
How have you seen the shift, I guess, in mindset from what Greene was then, which was a very successful but maybe more traditional background screening company, compared to what we're trying to do at Certn, which is really being a tech platform which happens to do background screening?
Greene was very well known for extremely good customer service and best of breed background screening checks. So I was very careful of what I said there, not best of breed technology, best of breed background screening checks. And back then, the emphasis was more on the quality. Well, you'll never get away from the quality of the checks. They've always got to be there. Whatever type of platform you're using, but back then the emphasis was more on the screening checks that we're actually doing, and the markets we were in were very regulated. So we specialize in more the financial services sector, the security industry, and also doing a lot of work out in the Middle East where we were background screening people that were getting visas to go out and work in Saudi Arabia, etc. That has never changed. The quality of the work has never changed. The service that we're offering has never changed because customers will always demand that no matter what. I think what we're seeing the change in now is technology sort of almost taking over, driving the industry. So, I mentioned before about, us having background screening forms couriered and faxed over. The evolving sort of the industry has evolved now where I think technology is more at the forefront. So when you're talking to a prospective new client, they're more inclined to ask you about your API, your speed of your service, than they are of, oh, can you do a credit check in France, for example?
Yeah.
So I think technology is more of the sort of is sort of almost in a sense not taken over, but it's more of the more. I think clients are more interested in how the checks have been delivered than they ever were before, and we can win and lose a client on our technology over the actual checks that we're conducting, which is quite an interesting sort of concept.
Yeah.
Whereas before, the emphasis was solely on the checks that you're delivering.
Yeah. I guess like fundamentally, background screening, and I'm new to the industry. I've only joined Certn sort of 18 months ago. And before that, my background was in identity. But background screening is similar to identity in that 99.9% of the time, all you're doing is validating information, which is actually true, which somebody is something and you're saying, yes, this is in fact accurate. But what we're actually doing is preventing bad actors from gaining access to employment, for gaining access to financial services, in the identity space, from, committing fraud, financial fraud, and those kind of things. How have you seen like the evolution of the bad actor in background screening? So going back, 15, 20 years ago, what was the typical case where somebody would fail a background check, or we would prevent somebody from gaining employment in a company, versus what we see today, which is, I guess, a whole new world of more sophisticated fraud?
You didn't see so much fraud. People were failing background checks, but you've got to remember now, people, back then, people were turning up for interviews with a CV in their hand. LinkedIn wasn't around, and people were failing, background screening checks because they've got a criminal record. Or, back then we were getting more information on references. So they had a bad reference, poor performance, they had a CCJ. Whereas now we're seeing candidates sort of almost like actively trying to commit fraud by obtaining a position. So what they're doing now is lying about job roles, making up jobs, using reference mills. We saw one the other day with a completely fake university degree, which you can make in literally 2 minutes.
Yeah.
So that's what we're seeing now, is people trying to actively commit fraud to obtain a job. That's the thing we're trying to do now, is just keep one step ahead of the fraudsters. And that's what the industry is about now, I think. We all know how to get an employment reference. You can do it digitally. You can phone up a referee. We all know that you can get an education reference by phoning up, I don't know, Oxford University Student Records Department. That's never changed. But now the industry, what we're trying to do is fake documents, where made up jobs, diploma mills, and things like that. And that's the whole sort of emphasis now on the background screening industry, is to stop these fraudsters obtaining positions in the banking sector and positions of trust where they can do active harm.
Yeah.
How have you seen the industry change then? And you've been in the identity space for quite some time. I mean, when I started, the ID bit was done. I think they send you a fax of a passport, and that was it. But it must have changed quite a lot. That's quite a relatively new part of the industry, really.
It is, yeah. And I mean, in order to do a background check on somebody, fundamentally, the first step is proving that they are who they say they are, or implying that. And that would have been easier, maybe 10 years ago or more, where on the first day in the job, they would turn up with their passport and you could actually verify it. But as we've done at Certn, we hired, 500 people, mostly remotely during COVID. So we didn't meet any of those people. And we had to find digital ways to verify their identity, and then following on from that, carry out the background check. We've seen, you've got Gen AI now, which is essentially like electricity. Anybody can plug in and have access to the most advanced AI humanity's ever seen.
Yeah.
And what that's done has really enabled and emboldened fraudsters. It's very cheap and easy now to create what are synthetic identities. So there's identity fraud where I can present to be Doug Beavis, and I can create an ID with your face on it, and I know you'll get a clean background check, and I use that background check to place myself in a company. That's using an existing identity. It's gone a step further now, where people can create identity documents and even turn up in meetings. Synthetic identities based on faces and identities that don't actually exist. They can use those to obviously keep themselves anonymous. They can use the things you've mentioned, like reference mills and fake university diplomas and police certificates from various countries to pass the background check. And they're seeding themselves inside companies all across Europe, the US, etc. And if you're a corporation with 15,000 employees and you need to bring on a cohort of 150 developers, all you're looking for is somebody who meets the bar, who can pass the technical examination, who interviews well, who can pass a background check, and then you give them the keys to the castle. Essentially, you give them access to your internal systems. And I talk about this quite often on LinkedIn. There are cases that we've worked on, and we've proven beyond reasonable doubt that there are state-sponsored, very sophisticated rings of teams of people who are actively using synthetic identities to seed themselves inside tech companies, inject malicious code, steal secrets. For example, if you can think of an electric car manufacturer from the Western world, you would have companies perhaps in China who would be looking to steal some of their intellectual property and recreate those designs. That's the perfect way to do that, is you get somebody inside, you seed them for a couple of months, you allow them to gain access to systems, and then slowly but surely you download that intellectual property and you reproduce it and you bring it to market. So it's sophisticated. And I think the industry, whether the identity industry where I come from or the background screening industry where you come from, we are playing catch up on that. And I haven't seen many novel solutions to actually effectively tackling this problem.
But surely you've created this fake identity, you've created this fake background. Surely a simple background check would uncover that. So, I've created an ID, I've turned up, I've done the interview, etc. But I've stated that I've gone to a certain university to gain that degree. But surely a simple check to that university would uncover the truth straight away, no?
Well, Doug, as you know, not all background screening companies are equal, no, right? And it really depends on how seriously your background screening vendor takes fraud. I can tell you one specific case from Europe where we were actually working previous to Trustmatic being acquired by Certn. We were working with another European smaller background screening vendor whose focus is more on Central Europe. And a specific case of a company in Central Europe had posted a couple of jobs, sort of mid-level engineers, had received a couple of hundred of applications. And one of them was a Danish citizen who was of Asian descent with a Western name and a very convincing Slovak fake ID. Well, like ID at that point, as they taught it to be. So it had all of the security features. It had all of the, biographic information, checksum, all that kind of stuff was there. So that's the first step of like you present the identity that gets accepted by a system. They then had a signed certificate from the Danish police stating that they had no criminal record, which was very convincing. They had a college diploma from the University of Copenhagen that they could scan and they could send to the background screening company, and loads of other things like a GitHub page, which obviously most engineers have, email address, website, Git repositories, like literally everything you would expect a mid-level engineer to have. And I would imagine in a lot of cases, if you submit that to a background screening company and they don't have that natural level of suspicion and they don't go above and beyond and do these logical and also tech-enabled checks, you take it on face value, that person gets a role inside a company, and then you've got the bad actor seated inside. And I think that's one of the things that makes us different at Certn, is that we don't just see a college diploma and say, well, they've scanned it into us or they've faxed it to us and we're happy to accept.
Yeah.
We actually go above and beyond, and most of our checks go direct to source, right?
Well, I sort of alluded to that earlier. 25 years I've been doing this. 25 years ago, we were still phoning up for references. We were still contacting universities. We were still verifying the data at source. That has never changed. That's, that part of the background screening has never changed and never will change. Always get the data from source. Always verify the data from source. Yeah, so it's quite interesting to hear that. Do you think as the sort of deepfake tech improves, do you think it will come to a stage when it's just impossible to detect?
Today, without the right technology, and there's very little of this technology on the market, I could turn up for an interview with you, Doug, and I could have a completely different face. I could have a cloned voice. So actually, I've been the target of fraud, and it happens quite regularly. And our usual podcast host, Andy, comes into this quite prominently. So I regularly get a WhatsApp message from a US number with Andy's face as the profile picture.
Right.
They will tell me that there's a top secret transaction happening, that we're acquiring a company, and that he's out of the country and needs me to do something, right? And this has been going on for ages. I would always get them and kind of ignore them. I had a bit of time on my hands recently in Australia, and I got one of those messages again. So I decided to engage just to see what the play was and to see how advanced they were. So the person who was orchestrating this, knew a lot about Certn, knew that Andy and I probably, work very closely together, knew I would be the right person to target, which is scary in and of itself. Knew enough about the company to sort of be semi-credible in what they were saying. They weren't completely off base with the things they were saying. And then what was really scary was I asked some things that, not everyone would know about Andy. Some very specific things about, where he's from, and these kind of things. And the person knew that. So they'd done their research. Then the really shocking thing happened where I received a voice note. And if I played it back to you now, Doug, you would think it was Andy. So they had probably taken snippets of this podcast where Andy's the host or videos of him on YouTube, of which there are, dozens. And you can use those samples of voice to recreate a person's voice, and you just type in what you want the voice to say, and it's say perfectly. So this voice had told me that I needed to transfer a couple of $100,000 into a different account because we were going to go ahead with this transaction. Yeah. And I'm obviously switched on because I live and breathe this every day. So I knew that I was baiting a fraudster here. But somebody who maybe isn't as switched on would have perhaps gone through.
They only need to send 100 of them out and get one.
Exactly.
Or 1,000 and get one. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the exact same thing. You've probably received letters in the post years and years ago telling you had a rich uncle who.
Oh, that's it. Yeah. There's a gold mine in Africa there. Yeah. They just need my details to transfer all the gold over to me. Yeah. I didn't get any gold, by the way.
You didn't get any gold?
No. Possibly a lot of money. Yeah.
It's the same basic principle. It's just more advanced, and they're doing a bit more homework. And that's a scary thing where, Andy, myself, yourself, we're kind of high profile in terms of like our faces are out there. We're on LinkedIn. We speak publicly. They had done their research. So what I did was I created a fake banking login page, right? For our Slovak bank account here in Slovakia, which is where we have the Trustmatic bank account, okay? And I sent a login page to the fraudster, which was totally fake, and I used a tool called Canary Token, which means that as soon as they click on the link, it captures their IP address, their device type, different metadata about the the location they're in. Now, most of the time they'll use a VPN. As it happened, the IP address came back to France. But I asked them to click on this and verify some information like security questions. Yeah. I asked them to sort of relatively, things about Andy that would be his typical security questions that not everybody would know, or people who are not close to him would know. They got one of them right and one of them wrong, which was scary. And then the next thing was they said, I said, yeah, you've passed the validation with one of the questions. So we're ready to send the money to you now, or to this account now. And they sent me a fully legitimate bank account in Slovakia, which was very scary. So either they've hijacked that account, which is a legitimate one in Slovakia, or it's being orchestrated from Slovakia, which I doubt. So they've probably gained access through the exact same type of fraud to a legit account. They've presented as a legitimate business scenario. I seeing this, legitimate company, legitimate account, might be inclined to send the money over and ask no questions, and that they would withdraw it and probably send it into a Bitcoin wallet or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's really scary what's out there. In terms of defenses against it, we at Certn we've been working on something for a number of months now, and I think we're pretty close to releasing it, which is a piece of software for deepfake detection. As you know, we work with thousands of companies globally, and our usual points of contact are HR leaders in those organizations, and sometimes CISO or people involved in IT security. And up until now, we've only really provided them with background screening. I think this is an additional layer we can offer to our client base, which is a piece of software that sits on your desktop. It's compatible with Zoom, Google Meet, Microsoft Teams, etc., etc. And if we were sitting here having a conversation and I happened to be a deepfake, it would just create a little flag on the right-hand side of the screen where the person hosting the meeting would see something's not right, something's suspicious.
Yeah.
The deepfake would be detected. So this is really great for interviews, right? Because, as you said, not very many people, or it's much rarer now that people would come face to face for an interview. Certainly in the early stages, most of them happen online, and people are flying blind today. They've no idea if the person is or isn't a deepfake on the other side of the camera. So this piece of software would sit there and just flag anything that seems suspicious and give us a sort of baseline or a passive way to protect ourselves or add a layer of protection from what we currently have.
Yeah, because I heard there's sort of certain ways you can detect by making them put their hands up in the air, and
you can do that. And what
things up. I think they'll just learn from that, though. No,
well, they have. So what some companies have done, or some companies would have a protocol in interviews where they would ask the candidate to hold up their identity documents, so their passport or their ID card, and that was a great way. You would hold it up and pass it across your face. And with the old deepfake technologies, that would create some lag, or of course they wouldn't have a document which was physical, because most of the fraudsters work with digital copies of fake IDs. They don't have the actual physical card. But they've caught up with that. So nowadays, what they would do if they were, relatively sophisticated fraud ring, is they would have a green piece of card, which is in the exact shape and size of a credit card or ID card. And the same technology that the weather forecasters use, green screen, right?
Green screen,
yeah. They would hold up the green card, and using this deepfake technology could project onto the green card a very convincing identity document. They can hold it up to the camera, they can move it, and the hologram will move in accordance to what it should be on a genuine document. They can pass it across their face, and nothing will change. So I think the human-led efforts for detecting deepfakes don't work anymore. You really do need a piece of technology which is analyzing the frames, using what's fundamentally facial biometric techniques, to detect things that look suspicious. And that's what I'm very excited about us bringing out to the market in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, crazy. So how do you think HR leaders are going to prepare for this shift then?
I think there's so a lot of HR leaders that I've spoken to are only becoming aware of the problem now. And I've started talking about this, as far back as 2 years ago. So that kind of concerns me. And I don't want to be, scaremongering, but I'm pretty convinced that there's a huge amount of companies out there, including in the UK, the US, Canada, and across Europe, who actually have bad actors seated inside the organization. These are people who are hired remotely, who show up, who do enough to get by from a performance perspective. They're actually trained engineers, so they can do the work. And they're just essentially like sleeper cells inside the organization, slowly gathering information, gathering data, seeding attacks, whatever their objective may be. And at some point, it's going to come to a head where a serious breach happens, serious theft happens, and then you can only be reactive, right? We do have a number of our customers, proactively reaching out to us, and we'll be, hosting some sessions in the coming weeks, who are a bit more clued into this. Who have perhaps seen this or happened upon instances of this in their organizations. And they're proactively coming to us and asking us what we're what we're developing, what we can do to help them protect against it. And I'm glad that we decided that it's a priority for Certn to be at the forefront of not just the background screening and the checking and the identity verification, but also the step before that, which is ensuring the people you're talking to are who they say they are and are bona fide.
So I'm just thinking out loud here. How do they get round? How do they get round? They've obviously got to pay these people, companies. You've got to have an NI number. In the UK, you have a national insurance number,
Yeah.
and a bank account, etc. You've got to be registered, you've got with HMRC. How are they getting around that? Do you know?
So these people would be remote workers. So
Right.
generally wouldn't be domiciled in the target country. So if I was I'll say North Korea, because there's actually an article on Wired today that I've contributed towards where we talk about a specific case of North Korean IT remote workers fraud. So if I'm part of a ring operating out of North Korea, and I want to get a job at Certn UK, for example, and seat myself in there, I'll create a persona which could be an IT developer working in Slovakia, for example.
Right.
So then what we do at Certn is we would hire that person through an employer of record platform. Okay. So they would be sort of, they would outsource the hiring process. They would outsource the employer of record service. And then like setting up fake bank accounts using or fraudulent bank accounts using, digital banks is still relatively easy. That's the failings of the identity verification industry there. So you can get a bank account. And then like, it depends how far you go on actually verifying the insurance number. I know that many employers sort of ask for it at the start, but will just pay the monthly fee.
Yeah, especially if they're based abroad, they probably wouldn't even know, what a Slovakian NI number or the equivalent over there would even look like. So what you're saying then, really, that it sort of is more prevalent in certain industries and roles than others.
Well, it's. I mean, the roles are usually software developer roles, because
Right.
roles where, software engineers tend to work in isolation for long periods. They may have a daily or weekly stand up where they would turn up to and usually be silent and listen and then go ahead and do the work. But it's also about the scale at which it operates, and I don't think people understand that. This is like thousands and thousands of people, so it's brute force from that perspective.
Yeah.
While also being sophisticated, and it's a numbers game for the fraudster. So if they apply for, one person might apply for, and it's all automated, so they might be able to apply for 1,000 jobs a day.
Yeah.
And so that 1,000, they might get 3 interviews, right? And so those 3 interviews, they may get no job offers, and they just cycle back again, and eventually they get a job. And then that one individual isn't getting just one job. They're probably able to work in a way where they can juggle maybe 2 or 3 jobs at the same time. And knowing that they'll probably lose one of the jobs within a month because the company will find out. But it's about, all you need is to be seated in one company for, you get past your probation period, you get seated in, and it's engineering is becoming like being productive in engineering is becoming easier or better with AI, right? So you can automate large parts of your role. Even genuine workers in IT companies, like some estimates say that in certain types of IT companies, about 30% of their workforce have a second job, unknown to their employer. So you can be productive, you can get by.
See, that's a worry in itself as well. See, there's another issue, isn't there? You wouldn't want, if you're a major bank and you're employing a software engineer, you wouldn't want that software engineer to be working in one of your competitors or any industry for that matter.
Yeah, I've read articles on this where you've got, very talented senior engineers who will use that seniority and their career history and their qualifications to land, well-paid 6-figure senior engineering role or a staff engineer role at a tech company or at a bank, as you say. They'll go in, they'll do the job, they'll meet the people, but after maybe 6 months, they'll actually outsource the majority of their work to a lower cost economy.
They don't actually do the work themselves.
They'll outsource it. They'll put it on Upwork or they'll put it on a job platform and they'll outsource it, right? And what they'll actually do is they'll get multiple jobs. So they could have 4 or 5 jobs, and their day to day is managing their team of workers who are doing the actual jobs for them. So the output that the hiring company is getting is still on par with what a person of that seniority would be delivering, just being I don't want to say clever about it because it's wrong, but they're being smart in terms of like they're outsourcing the work, they're 5xing themselves, and they're just managing this team of developers who are doing 80% of the work, and then they're adding the 20%, which makes the difference and reflects their seniority, right?
Wow. Crazy.
Yeah. I guess going back to your origins in the industry, the fraud was much less sophisticated, much more, I guess, innocent, more like a genuine case of someone trying to cover up the fact that they have a barring or a criminal conviction or those kind of things, right?
You know, we used to see little tricks like, I remember seeing one where they put their postcode the wrong way around.
Yeah.
Things like that to try and stop you finding their address.
Yeah.
You know, and the old typical ones are still going around now, changing your 22 and into a 21 and, you know, adding in an extra job or even leaving out a job that you were sacked from. You know, those things haven't changed, but they've just got more sophisticated, really. I think the first time it was really an eye-opener for me, you know, with the use of sort of technology was, I think going back, it might even be 10 years now, we had a candidate, worryingly enough, they were going for a job at the airport for a very large catering company. And so they were going airside. And I can even remember now, they said they worked at Hewlett-Packard, but they provided the email address of the HR contact at Hewlett-Packard with their email address. Right, but they created their own email address. There was a little dot in there where they shouldn't have been done. So when you contacted and emailed, the reference came back. So we received the reference back, but it was from the candidate. And that was like, it was about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And that was
advanced at that stage.
That was advanced then.
Yeah.
Oh, we only caught the guy because he had a really bad criminal conviction. And then we started looking at his background and stuff. And it turned out the reason why we caught him was because we'd never seen that before. And the reason why we caught him, his criminal record came back. Turns out he was in jail at the time.
Right. Okay.
So that's why I'd made the job up to get around that. But turned out, and it all unraveled, obviously, and he didn't get the job. But that was to go and work airside. So yeah, that was 10 years ago. I mean, things have evolved from there, but yeah, that's the first one I can really recall where, you know, there's people starting to use technology, you know, to circumnavigate the, you know, the background screening checks we're doing.
And with technology being such a big part of background screening now, Doug, like when you go out there and you talk to prospective customers and you meet their buying committee, how has the makeup of that committee changed over time? So I'd imagine that it was very HR heavy in the past, but now that it's tech charged, are you speaking to CISOs, security managers? Like what's the mix of people you need to get in front of to you know, persuade them that Certn is the right vendor for them?
Everyone now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a, you know, back then you just deal with, well, then, you know, people in culture now, but HR, it was there. They would look at it. Yeah, that's it. That's good enough for us. And off we go. You know, when we're talking to prospective clients now, we've got IT departments involved. We've got the security department involved. We have legal looking at everything. You know, it's not just about, you know, obviously we've got GDPR, data protection. You know, the candidates are very, very aware of their data now. You know, and data and where we hold the data and what we do with the data. They want to see the data. So there's so many different sort of cogs in the wheel now that, yeah, when we're selling to a prospective client, especially the larger ones, there's 4 or 5 different departments involved in the decision-making process. And it's not, you know, we could not get a new client just based on the platform, or, you know, it's lots of different. It's not just coming down to the actual checks nowadays. You know, there's so many different moving parts to the industry. But, you know, I think when it does come down to it, it does come down to the checks. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, you know, we are a background screening company. Okay, the technology is delivering the service, but you've still got to do the checks properly.
And the service on top of it, the support,
Of course, you've still got that, and that will never change. We're dealing with individuals who are getting jobs, paying their mortgages. Those sort of individuals there, we're dealing with people's data, with background checks, is a very, very important thing we're doing. And you'll never get away from the fact the quality of the check has got to be there. Despite all the technology, you'll still have to get the best of breed criminal record checks worldwide, the best of breed credit checks from the best sources worldwide. You'll never get around that element of the industry. And I think that's the most important thing to think about for any HR leaders out there looking for a background screening company.
I think that's a good bottom line to leave our discussion on this morning, Doug. It's been great chatting to you.
Yeah, good to chat to you too.
Lots of interesting insights. And thanks to everyone for listening. That was What the FTE for this week. And we'll be back next week with Andy back in the hot seat.